Welcome to the deep dive. Diving into this stuff, I'm always amazed at the stuff we just kind of take for granted, like how do muscles even work? You sent in some really cool stuff, by the way, a lecture transcript and a bunch of notes about muscle function and cell regulation. And let me tell you, you are not alone. I am right there with you, trying to wrap my head around all these microscopic wonders. So today we're going to break it all down, unlocking the secrets of how your muscles actually contract and how those tireless cells know when it's time to divide.
It really is amazing.
Yeah.
Like it's going on all the time and we don't even realize it.
Yeah. And, speaking of going on under the surface, one thing that really caught my eye in your notes was how the thick filament in muscle cells looks way darker than other structures. Like it's this microscopic clue begging to be deciphered. So what's the deal with that darkness?
Well, it's funny because that darkness actually tells us a lot about what the thick filament is made of. So picture this. It's jam-packed with these protein molecules called myosin, all lined up like disciplined soldiers. And each myosin has this little head on it, kind of like a tiny arm reaching out. And honestly, those little arms are the key players in muscle contraction.
Okay, hold on. I'm picturing a line of tiny arms. So how do we get from there to a muscle actually moving?
All right, so imagine those tiny arms grabbing onto a rope. Okay, now that rope is the thinner actin filament. And what happens is the myosin heads grab onto the actin and pull, causing the filaments to slide past each other. It's like a perfectly synchronized team of rowers pulling on their oars.
Okay, I'm with you.
And that coordinated action, believe it or not, is what shortens the muscle fibers, making your muscles contract.
Whoa, so every time I move my arm, it's because of this microscopic rowing team going on in my cells. It's wild. Okay, so then my notes also mention something called Z-discs. Are those like some high-tech protein or something?
The Z-discs, they're like the heavy lifters, the ones who keep everything in check. So imagine the Z-discs are like the two ends of an accordion, and the actin filaments are anchored to them. Now, when the muscle contracts, the myosin pulls those actin filaments closer together, bringing those Z-discs closer, just like squeezing an accordion.
So it's like this constant squeeze and release happening at a microscopic level. That's incredible. No wonder we got to fuel up to power those workouts. This makes me think, though, what happens if those Z-discs get damaged? Like, are we talking muscle meltdown?
That's a great question. And yeah, it shows how important it is that they're strong and healthy. If the Z-discs get damaged, it can really mess with how well your muscles work, leading to weakness or even injury. Think of it like this. If you weaken the support beams in a building, the whole structure becomes unstable, right?
Right. Yeah, that makes sense.
It's the same with muscles. Those Z-discs are crucial for keeping everything working smoothly.
Okay, so we've talked about muscles contracting, but what about muscle growth? I mean, that's got to be a whole other level of complexity, right?
Absolutely. Muscle growth, like everything else in our bodies, depends on cells knowing when to divide and multiply.
Right, and I noticed in my notes it mentions something called the cell cycle, almost like it's on a schedule. So how do these cells know when it's time to divide?
Well, there are these molecules called cyclins and CDKs, short for cyclin-dependent kinases. And they're basically the masterminds behind the whole cell cycle operation.
Okay, so cyclins and CDKs are running the show,
Exactly. They make sure everything happens in the right order at the right time.
like a tightly run ship.
Precisely.
But then my notes mention something called cyclin degradation. Why would something so important need to be broken down?
That's where it gets really interesting. You see, it's not about destroying the cyclins completely. It's more like hitting the reset button.
Okay, I'm listening.
Imagine a play with different acts. Once an act is over, you need to clear the stage for the next one, right?
Right.
That's kind of what cyclin degradation does. Once a cyclin has done its job, it's broken down to make way for the next phase of the cycle.
So it's all about keeping things moving in the right direction.
Exactly. It ensures the cell cycle doesn't get stuck or go out of control.
Which makes me think, what happens if those controls go haywire?
Well, that's when things can go really wrong.
Like what?
Well, one example is cancer.
Cancer.
Yeah, when cells lose control over their division and start multiplying uncontrollably, that's often a sign that something has gone wrong with the cell cycle.
So these cyclins and CDKs, they're kind of a big deal.
Absolutely. They're essential for healthy cell growth and development.
And speaking of keeping things in check, I noticed my notes also mention positive feedback loops. Now, usually positive feedback sounds like a good thing, but how does it work in the context of cell division?
Good point. You see, in this case, positive feedback doesn't mean good vibes. It means amplification.
Amplification.
Yeah, like a snowball rolling down a hill. As it rolls, it picks up more snow getting bigger and faster, right?
Right.
Well, positive feedback loops in the cell cycle work in a similar way.
Interesting.
They help to rapidly accelerate certain processes, ensuring the cell fully commits to dividing.
So it's like a point of no return.
Exactly. Once that snowball starts rolling, it's hard to stop.
And I see here that two key players in this feedback loop are CDC25 and WE1.
Ah, yes. The gas pedal and the brake pedal of the cell cycle.
I like that analogy.
So CDC25 is like the accelerator. It removes the brakes on the cycle, allowing it to speed up.
And WE1.
WE1 is the opposite. It pumps the brakes, slowing things down.
So it's like a constant balancing act between these two.
Absolutely. And that balance is crucial for healthy cell division.
Because if CDC25 just took over, we'd have cells dividing like crazy.
Exactly. It could lead to uncontrolled growth and potentially even cancer.
And if WE1 was always in charge,
Then cell division might slow down too much or even stop altogether.
which wouldn't be good for growth and repair.
Exactly. It's all about finding that sweet spot, that balance between speeding up and slowing down.
It's kind of like how we think about athletic training. You
Right.
know, we think about lifting weights or going for a run, but really it's all about pushing those internal processes, those microscopic engines that drive muscle growth and cell division.
That's a great way to put it. It's all about balance. Just like muscles need the right amount of stress and recovery to grow stronger, cells need those precise control mechanisms to divide without going haywire.
It's really amazing when you think about it, all these complex things our bodies are doing behind the scenes. So before we wrap up, let's recap what we've learned today about muscles and the cell cycle. We started by zooming in on those muscle fibers, figuring out how those thick and thin filaments, the myosin and actin, work together to make our muscles move.
It's like a perfectly choreographed dance happening at a microscopic level.
And then there are the Z-discs, those anchor points that help keep everything in line. And then we shifted gears to the cell cycle, where we met the masterminds behind cell division, the cyclins and CDKs.
And we can't forget about cyclin degradation, making sure those cyclins are broken down when they're not needed to prevent the cell cycle from spiraling out of control.
Right, like hitting the reset button. And then there are those positive feedback loops with CDC25 and WE1 acting like the gas pedal and brake pedal of the whole process.
All these intricate mechanisms working together to keep our cells dividing at just the right pace.
It's really mind-blowing when you stop and think about it.
It really is. It shows just how dynamic our bodies are, how we're constantly changing and renewing ourselves at a cellular level.
It really puts things in perspective. Well, that's all the time we have for today's deep dive into the fascinating world of muscles and cell regulation. From the microscopic structure of our muscles to the elegant dance of the cell cycle, we've uncovered a hidden world of complexity that keeps our bodies running smoothly.
It's been a pleasure exploring these wonders with you.
And as always, thank you for joining us on this incredible journey into the microscopic wonders of your own body.